Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. He was one of my earlier guests when I first kind of started doing interviews for my YouTube channels, which I recently got back. They magically appeared a couple months ago. His name is Joe Szimhart. His last name is spelled Szimhart. And he came to my attention. I came across this book on Amazon that I thought was interesting because of his background. The full title of that book is Santa Fe, Bill Tate, and Me: How an Artist Became a Cult Interventionist. And I've always been kind of like focused on cults and coercive cults and kind of mind control, maybe where it overlaps. So he was a great fit, and we did that show, and I actually restreamed it recently, so people can check that out on YouTube or Rumble or X now or Twitter, which is really becoming a great place to stream to, at least for me. But that's not the only shows we've done. We also did one on psychiatrist Lewis, Jolly, and West. Joe knew him personally. He has a much different take on West than kind of people in my kind of maybe alternate media environment, like a much different take, which I suggest people look at. People got really angry at me for posting that, but you have to give people, people are multifaceted. And also, we also talked about A Course in Miracles. Is it a miracle? That was in 2023. So this will be our fourth show. And Joe came to my attention. I've been kind of following him on YouTube. Sometimes I'll come across, or his YouTube channel will be pushed to me on YouTube, and I'll see his research. He's interested in the same things I am. I think the title or subtitle of his YouTube channel was Tracing the Occult in the Occulture. So it's like that word for me is like, turns a light on in my mind. So I followed some of the stuff. And he did a recent video on Thiel and his Antichrist lectures, which were kind of bandied about. People talked about it, but they weren't, to my understanding, they weren't published. I know that he went to the Commonwealth Club and gave a little lecture on the Antichrist. And for people who don't know what the Commonwealth Club in California is, it's probably one of the elite premier clubs. You're very exclusive, super swanky, very nice in downtown LA, I think. I mean, there may be other chapters, but I think he was talking to a pretty rarefied audience. So I'm glad to have Joe back to talk more about the Antichrist. Check out his video too. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel, but he's going to talk about that in his background. So Joe Szimhart, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, William. It's good to be here.
Awesome.
So we've got an interesting topic. It seems to be buzzing about the media and podcast airways. So yeah,
for sure. For people who hadn't heard our other shows, Joe, our other three shows, or may not be aware of you, your background, your experiences, maybe you can talk about that and then just lead into what you think about Thiel and his Antichrist lectures.
Okay. I mean, anyone can read my book, which is answering that question, or look at my website, which we'll put a link to. But basically, I've been around this cult territory or cultiverse since the 70s, when I was involved in metaphysical pursuits and cult-like ideas, following teachings of Theosophy, the Theosophical Society, the Agni Yoga Society, the I Am activity. And then I got involved with a group that combined all that, called the Church Universal and Triumphant, currently known as the Summit Lighthouse, which was its older name. So I was involved for about a year and a half, and not in the inner core, but deep enough to make it very difficult for me psychologically to break away. And which I did in 1980 in the fall. After I broke away from that group, some of the members that knew me, that recruited me, wondered why I quit. And so I sat down and talked to them, and within a few hours of discussing my reasons, they quit. There was a handful of them. And then I had interaction with a young woman while I was a portrait artist in Santa Fe, when I'm back here again, who was trying to recruit me into a Bible cult, like a Foursquare Bible cult. She was 19 years old, and she asked me to do a portrait for her fiance. Well, we got talking over the weeks I was there at this mall, and lo and behold, after talking to me about her group, which was very similar to the esoteric New Age group I left, she quit the group. And I met with her parents that came to pick her up afterwards, and they were just overjoyed. They hadn't talked to her in 6 months because the cult cut her off. that was my first experience of an exit counseling, and it was inadvertent. I wasn't looking, and her mother came up to me and said, we've been praying for her, and we think God sent you. Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to believe that, but it was a circumstance that just happened. And so I got involved in the intervention field professionally by around 1986. And I made my living as a deprogrammer, exit counselor for about 12 years. And then I worked for 25 years in a psychiatric hospital, which I worked there until last winter. And my wife and I moved back here to Santa Fe after being away for 33 years. And so I'm starting a LLC, a consulting business, to help people and educate people about this cult problem and occult matters and that kind of thing, which I've been spending 45 years exploring. So that's about it. And Peter Thiel and others that have what I call speculative metaphysics or speculative ideas about the gospel come to my attention. A lot of people ask me about that. So I did a couple of videos, my reaction to Thiel. And so that's it. We can get into Mr. Peter Thiel and what's going on with his Antichrist motif.
Yeah, I mean, he's super influential. He's influencing politics and culture and the economy. And so he's got a lot of, hands in a lot of different things. So I think it's important when he's talking, he's telling people stuff. But my understanding of his Antichrist lecture is that it's not really consistent with Christian theology. It uses Christian terminology, but it's not really consistent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with it. I mean, just the basic concept of what he thinks the Antichrist is. He projects, and a lot of people do, fundamentalists do in religion, project these kind of cosmic ideas or myths into an agent, that there's going to be some kind of an agent. The Antichrist is going to be a person on a throne, leading world affairs, or the Antichrist is going to be some system, some algorithm running the economy of the world, or whatever. In my understanding, I grew up Catholic, and I was an altar boy back in the day. But the idea of Antichrist is about behavior, and that's why I call myself a behavioral consultant in terms of cults. The Gospels teach to me that if you follow the Sermon on the Mount and your behavior is according to Christ-like principles or godly principles, then you are pro-Christ, and you're anti-Christ when you don't do that, when your behavior is not in line with kindness and goodness and honesty and all of that. It's the beliefs are there, but beliefs have to result in behavior. So with Thiel, he's coming up with a system, what's called a cult of ideas, or there's different ways to form cults. You can form cults around a person, idea, movement, and certain behaviors that you define. But so he has this idea of the Antichrist, and he seems to derive it from someone, Carl Schmitt, to some degree. And they also borrow it from, I forget his name.
René Girard.
Yeah, Girard's theory. And Girard basically broke away from this. I think he doesn't agree with all this. But the idea is that there's some kind of a catacomb, they call it, or something out there which will hold back the coming of the Antichrist. And it comes from Thessalonians, Paul, in the gospel. And this whole speculative version that Peter Thiel puts out is expanding on that idea that this Antichrist is somehow coming up. And so he sees the idea of the crucifixion, I think, as that there's this scapegoat idea that comes up. Maybe you can speak about that a little bit.
I just know that Girard did something that all societies need a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And Schmidt was like kind of a Nazi philosopher, is my understanding. So he's using this catacon idea. It's pretty suspect. Like he thinks, but my understanding is that he doesn't believe in a literal Antichrist. The Antichrist is the things that are keeping people from moving forward. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, I got that. It's kind of like a system that's in place, or Thiel is not specific. He tends to dance around what he's trying to say, at least from what I read. And so there's this vagueness involved in the way he approaches this, but one of his critics is this guy Wolfgang Palaver, I think his name is, and who he knows. They know each other and they're somewhat friends, but they don't agree on how this whole thing is supposed to work. So I'm going to read from what I downloaded here. It says, Palaver says you need to first understand that he, Peter Thiel, is human. And he said, what I've observed are traces of deep fear. He told me, fear of death, fear of terrorism. And it all comes down to a lack of trust and a craving for security. So he sees Peter Thiel more as an immature philosopher when it comes to the idea of Antichrist or whatever. I don't think he takes him as seriously as Thiel takes himself. So, and maybe because Thiel basically isolates this idea of Antichrist in his own subjective formulation, which is called eisegesis. When you look at hermeneutics, he's not doing exegesis. In other words, it's not very applicable in a broad sense to Christianity. It's very much subjective and personalized, and because he's extremely wealthy, people take him seriously because he can throw money into something and make it work socially, affect society, much as any totalist cult leader might do in terms of their influence. So I don't know if that's his intention. I really don't know. I just think that he has gotten into territory with this concept of Antichrist, which is over his head theologically.
Yeah, I think that he's not really addressing it from a Christian perspective. I think in Ephesians or something it mentions it, but I think that if he's part of the Bilderberg Society and all of these secret things, and he's got friends in places, and he wants to actually become a resident of the Isle of Malta, so he's an international. So I think that he's trying to create a philosophy that benefits himself. I think that's it. I think he criticized Greta Thunberg too, like as somebody who's like a backwards person. So I think his ideas of Antichrist are more consistent with somebody, like it's consistent with his ethos of like the well-meaning individual who's making change in the world, kind of like. I think that's it. So people who resist that are the forces of Antichrist. I think that's his view, because he's really, I don't think he's like one of these guys of the Dark Enlightenment. I just did a show on that think that they can make their own, reality better than these political systems can. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's kind of like the extravagance or the of power. Somebody's in power and they feel they're chosen and their ideas are God's ideas, and therefore they share these with the world. I mean, this happened with just about every one that gains a lot of power, and it's difficult to criticize someone like that because he doesn't have to listen to anybody. So, and In fact, a lot of people listen to him because his money means something. For instance, getting J.D. Vance into the vice presidency had a lot to do with his influence and power in terms of finances. But I think the concept of Antichrist that he's putting out here is, again, it's kind of fundamentalist. It doesn't have the rigor of the gospel to it. So I think he's outside of that realm, and almost in kind of a neo-Gnostic realm of seeing the world divided into black and white and radical dualistic ideas, which is what Gnosticism is based on, and that somehow the metaphysical is much more important than the physical, meaning that
he's like I think you mentioned in your video he's a deconstructionist. Like there's not as many external truths for him. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. It's basically ideology of a sort, and when you think about the idea of Antichrist, and it's something that works in the world as the world works. It's not something which is going to be imposed from the cosmos onto the earth, like some kind of a virus that passes through. And this is just something we deal with as if you're a Christian. The Antichrist is constantly around. It's that little whispering demon in your ear telling you not to help that person on the street that just fell over and is vomiting. Maybe they need to go to a hospital. And you got to get to work. That to me is Antichrist. It's not this mystical, demonic power that is somehow going to change the economy and keep wealthy people from getting wealthier.
I think in the Christian system, it's both. Like there's the spirit of Antichrist, and then a personage too. So it's like it's doubly kind of confusing from Christian theological perspective.
I think you're right. I mean, there is metaphysics in Christian teaching, obviously, especially when you get to the Gospel of John. It gets pretty out there.
Even Revelation too, right? So
that's even further. That's much more abstract and metaphorical and interesting. And and in the early church, there was a big debate on whether to even include Revelation. It was considered extra biblical in the sense of the essential teachings that they were trying to hand down, but it was included, and we're still dealing with it because people keep thinking that we're in the end times. Every generation seems to come up with some interpretation of Revelations and applying it to themselves or to the current state of affairs.
It's very true. Like the end times has never gone away. We're always at the end times. People are always looking for the end times. The other thing is that you kind of also see Thiel as somebody kind of in the eyes of or see him as a kind of cult leader where he's creating a self-sealing social system. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, I've used that term, self-sealing social system, to describe what happens when cult formation takes place. And the central idea behind it is that there's some kind of a transcendent attraction, some sort of a transcendent statement, which is true of every religion, good or bad. And then there has to be a leader that defines that or that translates that to the public. You have Moses going up on the mountain, and then he has to come down and somehow explain what happened to him up there with the burning bush. We can look at that as metaphorical or as a vision. We don't know what it really was. And then the third thing I look at is the how something circles around this central idea. And so there's some kind of activity, circular activity, which is the cult activity. Now, it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's gotten tighter and there's a certain belief inside and outside the system. And the last thing is what Robert Lifton called the dispensing of existence, or the idea that you decide who is saved and who is not saved. Who is real and who is not real. Who's elite and who's not elite. Who's a Gnostic and who's not a Gnostic. It's that kind of a decision. And once that happens, then you end up with a self-sealing social system when you decide who belongs and who doesn't, who's among them. So, Peter Thiel goes in very elite circles, and people that can afford to be in those circles, or at least are invited into it, and they can form self-sealing systems, because of who they invite and who they don't invite, and that can diminish dialogue, productive dialogue. Another way of looking at it is Bion's ideas of W.R. Bion, who I really like, his way of looking at self-sealing systems. But the more open way is sometimes more messy, where closed systems tend to appear cleaner. It's a lot easier to control what's right and what's wrong. He called them basic assumption groups, when people fall into basic assumptions. Working groups tend to be more open. They tend to be more like the way the U.S. was conceived, as three powers in government, and more democratic, a democratic republic. It's a little bit messy. It doesn't always get things right, but it's self-adjusting as time goes on. Whereas when you get more toward basic assumption groups, which tend to be totalistic in their ideas, based on the ideas of a leader, they can collapse into dictatorships rather quickly, which we've seen throughout history. Theocracies tend to collapse into dictatorships, depending on what God you represent, whether it's some variation of the God of the Christians. We have different totalist systems within Christianity. We call them cults. And there's thousands of them. You have the same thing in Hinduism. You can have, these totalist cults in different religions, depending on how they begin and form. So, I'm not sure if what's happening around Peter Thiel's ideas is driving toward another totalist cult in government, but it could, because some of the elements are there.
I think I think you're right, Joe. He really is. He's very influential, and this guy Vance is kind of a creation of Thiel. So he's really kind of a Thiel cutout. And my understanding, the rumors that I heard, is that he selectively invites people to his inner circle, or his inner kind of core, like people, cultural figures, comedians, come to my dinner, come and sit down, or go on Joe Rogan and say things. And it's kind of like, so he's very much, I would say, very involved in kind of culture maintenance, or almost like what a cult leader would do, is like, this is the person I want to influence. So he's selectively selecting influencers for his own, almost like the Scientologists did the Celebrity Center, how they did that. They selectively targeted influential members of the culture. I think he's involved in this culture creation. When he talks about the Antichrist and his version of it, it's seeding our culture. I don't think there's any question about it. I think he's meant to seed it. I think, like you said, like, this is his kind of like casting out a net to see who buys into his worldview.
Well, it's a way of owning a word. I mean, you bring up a word, Antichrist, as a buzzword. People have been using it, especially in fundamentalist Christianity. It's always a big deal to name who or what the Antichrist is, and there's constant interpretations of it, but I think it's best to keep it pretty simple. It's when you don't follow the goodness that Christ taught. You don't follow the Sermon on the Mount. That's where it lives. But when it becomes theoretical and cosmic, this dissension of the Antichrist is going to take over the world as some kind of a dark force. Then you get into territory where I was in with the cult I was in, the Church Universal and Triumphant, or Summit Lighthouse, that went into all kinds of metaphysical, theosophical definitions of what that was. And you kind of got into that idealism, subjective idealism of the group, and lost what it really was, which was, whether you're treating your family correctly. And a lot of people in the cult began to reject their family, condemn their family for not believing the way they did. And there's this inside and outside dichotomy that gets exaggerated. And I think that's what can happen here if people begin to pick up on this.
But it's also the use of language. Like you talk about the use of language. You did the with Wittgenstein quote, and that's almost a common theme in cults too. Is like going back to Scientology, they have almost like a whole new different version of the English language, right? And do you think that? It's very similar to what Thiel's doing. That's a stretch.
Well, one of the heroes I have in this field of cults or whatever is Robert J. Lifton, who wrote the book Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, came out in 1961, and in there, one of the 8 themes of a totalistic system is loading the language. So you come up with a very special language that only insiders can understand, and it can bend the minds of outsiders that want to try to find out what's going on. And so if you load the language with what exactly the Antichrist is, you can bend that term to fit a definition.
Right.
And
that's what he's done, because it's not he's not talking about the standard Antichrist.
No,
he's talking about people who are resisting human progress based upon technological aims, which is what he's involved in. His Palantir is what I think it was at one point one of the new top 100 biggest companies in the U.S. Which is crazy.
So it's kind of self-serving, selfish, if you want to call it that, which is one of the definitions of the devil, being selfish rather than service-oriented.
I have this video you sent me to. Do you mind watching it right here?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's see if I play.
Play for you one of the most chilling clips I've ever heard. And just hold on and trust me, because it's not that chilling until you realize what it means.
The basic idea was that we could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
That's tech billionaire and Republican megadonor Peter Thiel speaking at a Libertopia, a libertarian conference in 2010. He's basically saying that his political ideology is so unappealing that it'll never win elections. And that's one thing he's right about, because he's railed against women having the right to vote, complained so much about diversity, and written some really disgusting stuff about sexual assault and consent. But he knows that he can use technology as a unilateral alternative to politics, and that should really freak you out. Thiel is one of the co-founders and biggest investors in Palantir, a CIA-funded technology company that has contracts across the government for their data software. Here's their CFO speaking a few years ago.
We continue to advance our mission of becoming the US government's central operating system as we extend our footprint across defense, healthcare, and civilian agencies.
And while both President Obama and Biden did sign Palantir contracts, President Trump is taking it way further. There are new contracts with ICE, something literally called Immigration OS, and the IRS. So 15 years ago, Peter Thiel, like the supervillain in a movie explaining his plan to the hero, admitted that he can use technology to get his ideas across when they're unpopular, completely subverting democracy. And today, one of his technology companies is gaining more and more power within the government, building the very systems our government relies on. And oh yeah, this is the CEO.
The central risk to Palantir and America and the world is a regressive way of thinking that is corrupting and corroding our institutions, that calls itself progressive, but actually, and is called woke, but is actually a form of a thin pagan religion.
If you're a progressive, if you have progressive values, meaning you just, care about other people, the CEO of the company building America's technological back end thinks of you as the central risk. He thinks of you as the enemy. Are these the people you want running the systems you rely on, or worse, the systems that surveil you?
Yes, So that clip is interesting in that, you're getting into this Big Brother kind of Orwellian world, which we're very close to because we're actually feeding into it with our cell phones. We or mobile devices. We're continually letting people read us all around the world. And, that information can be used against us in some ways. And I don't see any way around it. We love to communicate. That's who we are. We're social beings. But that can backfire in terms of who's controlling the system and the information and bending it a certain way.
Right. If it's Thiel who says it's an end, technology is an end around against the political system, then we're in a new sense of politics, really, right?
Well, in the end, all technology is human generated, and humans have flaws. And unless we're self-correcting or corrected from some outside force, like a democratic government is supposed to be self-correcting the way it's set up, and you can vote people out every 4 years. And if you look at the illiberal democracies like Hungary, for instance, they got rid of the idea of democracy and they undermined the whole principle in Hungary, much like in Russia, where the leader stays in because the country would be too unstable if the leader left. That's the excuse. So you begin autocracy. So this American experiment, is very fragile. And we've seen it go through different phases. And we're kind of lucky to have it, because it's generated wealth and a lot of freedom of expression of ideas. The marketplace of ideas is still very rich in America, but and in democracies around the world. But that can be taken away, and you can end up with, a global North Korea. I mean, you can see that coming someday too, and I don't think it would be that easy, but who knows? If you get one big catastrophe where the whole world is under some sort of high stress, it's easy to collapse into totalism, what Robert Lifton called totalism. Reading that the trilogy, The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu, he talks about that in the second book, where there's this. It took 5 minutes for a whole culture that's on this, like a starship, to become totalistic because of the stresses around it. And he refers back to the experiment done by a high school teacher in 1967 in California, and it was a movie called The Wave that came out of it. And he does an experiment on his high school class, trying to teach them about Nazi Germany, and he turns his whole class within a week, the 10 days of 2 weeks, into a Nazi type of Nazi youth group, and they didn't know what was happening to them. But it shows that there was a film done on that. So that came out in this book. It shows very clearly that totalism can happen very quickly, and especially if a culture is under a lot of stress, and we're getting under more and more stress globally. So these totalistic systems can begin to take over democratic systems because they offer simple, quick, rapid solutions.
Right. And safety too, right? So this is,
they give you if you side with that, then you feel safe. Yeah.
Right. And it was interesting that Karp in that video says that the enemy is this thinly veiled paganism. Like, wow, so this kind of view is pagan and we are the that puts him into the anti-pagan forces. You want to talk about totalist religion, it's like simple binary, right? This is like woke is thinly veiled paganism. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. But, I mean, you can impose totalism using any religion. You can use Buddhism, you can use Hinduism, you can use Christianity. It depends how you dumb it down, how you define it, and impose it on people. You can twist the words of Jesus, and many cults have done that, thousands of them. So you can twist the words of Lenin, you can twist the words of Tolstoy. You can. It just depends on how open the debate is around whatever is being said. And that's probably the key to this whole thing, is to keep the debate open and allow other voices to be heard, like you would in any democratic society. But it seems like, there is this exaggerated pronouncement of what's evil and what isn't, and it allows for totalism to take place for government, like in Hungary. It was evil to allow all of these immigrants into a very small country of 10 million people, and they were afraid of losing their Hungarian identity, being overwhelmed by immigrants, and that fear was taken up by Viktor Orban, and people bought into him, at least enough people to elect him, and now he's pushed it even further, where now he's aligned with Putin more or less than he is with Russia. And there's a lot of American so-called Christians that have gone to Hungary and kind of thought that what Orban is doing is interesting. It might work in America, but it's called illiberalism. It's not what our founding fathers conceived of here.
No, that's what Yarvin thinks. He thinks that there's like this concept of a cathedral, and it should go away, and there should be some kind of like almost a technate who should run everything, and that it would be more equitable in that regard.
Well, it would be more efficient.
Right.
We don't have an efficient society. It's kind of messy. And one thing that a totalist does not like is messy. In other words, if you have people gendering themselves, for a while during their lives, it's kind of messy. You don't know whether it's a he, she, it, or what. And it irritates people that tend to be conservative. So we've been going through that problem, and also the idea of immigrants. Our country has been founded on immigration, and a lot of our farming systems, especially in the Southwest and in the East and New Jersey, depend on immigrants to come during the picking season, the harvest season, because they work cheaper. Americans don't like to work for $5 an hour or whatever it is. So, that's part of our culture. It doesn't mean it's evil or bad or it's going to undermine the culture. It just has to be managed properly. But now we got this whole thing about, sealing off the border and, immigrants that come in, quote, illegally or even temporarily, or, so we're going through some changes right now. I don't know how long the American public will tolerate it, but Peter Thiel, he got his guy into office and he could be president.
He sure did. They all did. If you remember when Trump was elected, sitting behind him were all of the great big tech oligarchs, Google, Thiel, Musk. I mean, the list of guy from Apple, whose name I can't remember right now, but they're all there. Like, he was showing that tech was on board with him. And you did a video on Thiel's speculative religion. Luminous Lux says, I can't even pinpoint what belief system Thiel touts. Any ideas? Do you want to expand on that or talk about his speculative religion?
Well, I don't know if he has one. There is a harking back to who is it? Leo Strauss and his ideas. It seems like he had a Straussian moment, and that still seems to be part of his theme here, and that's basically stating that democracy can't work, not in a modern age. It's too messy, and so the idea of a theocracy or something resembling that, and is better to manage society, because there's too many people displaying too many power moves, like gendering themselves in 11 different ways rather than having two genders. So that's a big deal to these people. Where overall in society, it's not that big a deal. There aren't that many numbers in terms of people doing that kind of extreme self-gendering. But yeah, Leo Strauss's ideas, I think, influence this whole idea of applying a kind of a theocracy back into society, because that would help us manage it better. It's simpler You don't have the messiness of American democracy.
Democracy is messy. That's like the whole thing. It's like you have dispersion of powers, and there's always the temptation for centralization. But the people who founded this country resisted that temptation. But
Yeah, they didn't want a king. That was what was some kind of a fickle human who could be influenced, based on his own jealousies and prerogatives, and not really seeing what's good for the people. So we got rid of kingdom. It was risky. And in fact, in the early days, some of the Americans around Washington that were still favoring some of the British system wanted to make George Washington king, and
right.
He stepped out of that. There was a movement, toward that to kind of reestablish that, because it's simpler. It's a lot easier to define. We're still defining democracy, what it means. We have bills and amendments, and
Right.
and government, some say, has gotten too fat because of that. You have too much government, and that's part of the appeal of having the more lean government that Trump claims to represent, is to pare it down, to get rid of it. But the problem is, when you get rid of that, you also can get rid of those forces which are there to protect the rights of the people.
Right. Yeah.
And when you erode that, then you begin elevating back into an autocracy, a kingdom, or whatever you want to call it.
These guys on the right, the alt-right or whatever, that include this guy who's kind of coming up, Nick Fuentes, they all, and this includes Thiel too, is the power and the centralization of the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Empire. They like that. They like Stalin. So
Right.
these are tells, guys. These are dangerous things. Like,
Well, you can see this also in Russian politics under Putin. He's adopted something called cosmism. And if you look at the history of it, it started in the 19th century, and it appeals a lot to people that want more totalism in government, more power at the top than with the people. And if you look up cosmism, it's a very interesting history behind it, but it also was aligned with the idea of the spread of technology and going into space. And part of cosmos theory is that we're going to discover the original Eden, somewhere, and that everybody that died will be able to resurrect at some time, because we're all space dust after we die. But there's going to be a way to resurrect everybody. It's very bizarre, but that's taken hold of Putin and some Russian leaders, is this idea of cosmism.
Interesting.
But all that basically is the same thing as if you applied theism, let's say, to a democratic nation. Then you end up destroying the democracy. You can't have a theistic, dictator on top in a true democracy.
Right. There's a lot of temptation. I guess there should be a book called like The Temptation to Centralization, because it always happens,
Yeah.
It's always going on. And US is really unique in that sense that it's happened more and more as DC's become more powerful in federalization, but still it wasn't intended to be this centralized. It was supposed to be independent states, guys. If anybody has any questions for the guest, put them in the chat, please. They all come in. For people who don't know, you're on different sites, and you're using StreamYard, if you're on any sites, they all get centralized to me. So you may not see the entire chat. I tried to have the ticker run so that you guys could see it, but I'm also trying to manage it too. We've got 250 live listeners, so everybody, thanks for tuning in. And so hopefully,
thank you.
You can follow up with Joe and check out his YouTube channel. He has a hard stop, so we might follow up with another follow on to this. But he does talk. Thiel talked about, there was a Hoover Institute, a lecture that I looked at, and he mentioned Girard and this love of the Roman Empire. He didn't say love of the Roman Empire, but the admiration for these big giant, powerful organizations like the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church, which is still very powerful and centralized. I mean, you want to talk about centralization. I mean, it's something else. And I did a show on not like Nick Land, who is a bad guy, but also Yarvin, who's kind of influenced these guys.
Yes.
And has that kind of centralized, we can do better than the current system view.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. We have this idea of centralized government. You have to have some of that, but it has to be moderated continually. You can't, or else you end up with a dictatorship. And in any company that you form, you have to have some kind of centralized government, or else it can't function. There has to be rules and regulations and a leader, but there's also has to be a mechanism to get rid of the leader. If they're not functioning properly in any corporation, in any church, in any nation, or that calls themselves democratic. But when you have going on now is this push toward centralized leadership that gains more and more power, like a corporate leader might have, and doesn't want to let go of his holdings. So you have this. Back in the cult I was in, the Church Universal and Triumphant, used to call this the capitalist communist conspiracy, to take over the world. There was some truth in that, except that the cult, the Church Universal, at the time run by Elizabeth Prophet, was acting like what it was criticizing. Right. It's like.
It goes back to Girard, right? So she had her scapegoat, but it's a deflection. These scapegoats often are deflections from the real. Right. The real perpetrators, these centralizers. Like Claire Prophet was really something else. When I talk about some of the techniques of like cultism and language and manipulation of language.
It was all there. And that cult blended everything from, fundamentalist Christianity, the theosophical stuff, Indian religion. It blended everything together, So when I was involved in that, it gave me an insight into a wide variety of cult behaviors out there because of its syncretism. It just blended everything into this great white brotherhood of masters that run the universe and influencing the earth. And this one person, Elizabeth Prophet, was their spokesperson.
Right.
No one else could do it.
Always are. Blavatsky and Crowley, they're always the same. Or I'm the source, guys. It's me. Or Hubbard. Hubbard actually called himself Source, if I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, he did.
Joe, we are at the 50-minute mark.
Right.
If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. I'll see if I can go through and find some.
Yeah, why don't you find one or two? Because I do have to go. It's a hard stop for me.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Thanks for working around my schedule. Let's see. I wonder if the LDS Church is going to relinquish all authorities. Mr. Dana and Armageddon. Maybe they believe in Armageddon. This whole concept of Armageddon is around. There's no question. Let's see. Anybody have any questions? Great stream. Thanks, Uncle Ted. Thanks, everybody, for listening on short notice. And if anybody has any questions, put it out here. Nick Land and Yarvin, they both go together. These are guys who believe in this. They also think this aggregation of power, but they never provide a way out. Like, how does this power stop or disperse? That's one of the giveaways, is like they're never saying, oh, well, you can aggregate this power and then give it away for free. It never works out like that. There's very few instances in history where people give away power. They usually used to be, they would die or something like that. Like George Washington quitting his job after 8 years was very unique.
That was unique, yeah, and it set a precedent, which we hopefully can continue to do, unlike happening in Hungary and Russia and other places. Yeah.
Well, YouTube is saying 10 people watching, but I'm seeing 250 over all platforms. That's what you don't get, Spam Hunter. These comments come from 3 YouTube channels, Rumble, Twitter X, Rockfin, and they're coming in. So you may only see 10 people on one YouTube channel. I don't know which one of my YouTube channels it is. I was really dumb when they started censoring me, because I would just start a new YouTube channel and then they cancel that. There's actually another YouTube channel of mine out there that they're not giving back to me. So yeah, Dystopian C67 on her YouTube channel. Any thoughts on Girard's book on scapegoating, Joe?
I haven't read it, so I read about it, but I don't know. What do you know about it? Maybe I can comment on that.
I don't know much. I've heard it in different instances. Girard seems to be a philosopher, French philosopher people are going back to. But I remember his kind of concepts on the counter initiation. So kind of coming out of certain enchantments of people and things like that.
Okay. There was something I printed out just to reference, but from this essay on Peter Thiel from Wired, and it said for some Girardians, this was a breaking point. The mimetic theorist Bernard Perret lambasted Vance and his billionaire mentor in a French political journal, accusing them of casting a shadow over Girard.
We lost Joe. He seems to have broken up. Maybe it's me on my side, but no, there you go. You're back. Maybe a good way to end. Do you remember? Do you have that Wittgenstein quote that you said in the Thiel thing?
Yeah, I have it up here.
Maybe that's a great way to bookend this. We only have 5 more minutes.
Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of my favorite philosophers. He was kind of a contrarian in some ways, but he also privately maintained his Catholic religious faith, but it wasn't something he dealt with philosophically. He said that philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of our language. So we can get caught up in our own words. They can become an echo chamber. We keep hearing the same words in totalistic societies. And Robert Lifton called it loading the language. If you load the language of a culture, you can actually bend the way they think.
It's Orwellian, right? It's
Orwellian newspeak. Yeah. That's basically what it was. Lifton called it loading the language. But yeah. So Wittgenstein's good to look at in terms of that, and his idea of philosophy was just a way to break down what some people said here, the word magic. The magical spell that words can cast over us. Wittgenstein always attacked that and tried to find a way to break that apart. So we see a lot of these word games going on around Thiel and that
We
whole crowd of billionaires that are influencing government in the world through Trump at this point. It's a little alarming, but it's America and things can change. People do sometimes wake up and vote these guys out. So
yeah, this is Joe's channel. If you're watching this, so check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can go see these
The Wave,
videos.
yes, yeah.
The Wave is the name of the movie, right?
It's called The Wave.
Winters.
It came out in 1967, and it was based on a classroom experiment out in Palo Alto, California.
Yeah, hit the like, guys. Hit like on any YouTube channel there. Lily says you can find the truth through language. They also use myths as code words. Yeah, they do. And I think that some of these things that Thiel's talking about is like the power of certain myths and things like that, or his view of Armageddon and Antichrist are somewhat myth. They're not tied in Christian theology, in my opinion. But we had 250 live listeners. Check it out. Joe, where can people find you other than your YouTube channel and your book?
Well, I have email. They can look that up. It's jszimhart@gmail.com. And, I tend to answer people if they email me. So that's one way to find me.
Yeah, and you have a lot of videos. You put a lot of material.
Yeah, I have a lot of videos.
Yeah,
and,
a lot of different
probably
subjects.
over 100 by now on different topics, including this one.
Yeah, so go check it out. Put a link to that. And again, it's Joe Szimhart, Szimhart. So check that out. You can just type it into YouTube. And today we talked about the concept of Peter Thiel's Antichrist. I think these subjects and the importance of them is not going away. So
No.
I think it's important to watch these guys. And they're all they have their own philosophies. They're so impactful. It's important to see like where they're going. Guys like Thiel. So is there anything else you'd like to add? I know you got to run.
Yeah, I got it going in about 30 seconds here. We can follow up on this.
Okay, great.
Maybe be a little more specific because this is like a broad general topic about Thiel. And The thing is, he's changing a bit too. I don't know if he's going to get out of this bubble he's in. You know, he's caught up in himself because he's so powerful, and which happens to wealthy people.
Sure does. And people, check out our other interviews. We covered A Course in Miracles, Lewis Jolyon West, and also Joe's writing about becoming a cult interventionist and all his involvement and stuff like that. Really great book. Santa Fe, Bill, Tate, and Me, How an Artist Became a Cult Interventionist. And again, the guest is Joe Szimhart. Joe, thanks. Till next time. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay there.